Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Non-Toxic Environments Podcast. This is Andy Pace. This is a fun week. We're going to be talking about paint. Now, if you've listened to the Non-Toxic Environments Podcast before, you know I sell paint. I've been selling paint for 30 years. But today is different. Today, we are going to be talking about natural, mineral-based paints. That's right, paints that are made without any plastics, without any synthetics, but made specifically or solely with ground-found minerals and water. Where can you use it? Why would you use it? How do you use it? These are the questions we're going to answer today. And to help us, I've brought in Roy Suttles, who's the managing director of Keim USA, one of the world's leading manufacturers of mineral paints, to give us all the information. So please enjoy. Roy, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Andy. Glad to be here, and thanks for having us on. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Definitely. Now, I've known about Keim I've been in the business now for 30-some years, and I think I was first introduced to Keim 25 years ago. We used to carry a product called Hansa Silicate, which is a silicate paint made out of Latvia. And at the time, we started importing it, and I fell in love with the concept because, for those who don't know, the differences between latex paints, traditional paints that we use here, and mineral paints, and I'll let you get into it, but the gist of it is that mineral paints are free of all those plastics. And for our customers, it just seemed to be the perfect application. Our clients are looking for materials that don't contain plastics or don't have chemical off-gassing issues. And the concept of using the mineral paint was just a perfect application for us. That product kind of went away here in the States, and really happy to be connected now with Keim. So please give us a little bit of information about exactly what is a mineral paint and how does it differ from traditional latex paints?
Okay, sure. Well, mineral paint technology in general, it's been around since 1878. The founder of our company actually invented the paint in, as I mentioned, 1878. That was the patent issued at the time. And it was the result of a contest, really. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, probably better known for his building of the Neuschwanstein castle in Bavaria, fell in love with he was a patron of the arts, both performing and visual, and spent some time in Italy and fell in love with the beautiful frescoes of Italy. He tried to bring those back to the harsh alpine environment of Bavaria, and needless to say, they didn't last very long. So he commissioned a contest for the alchemists of the time, or the chemists of the time, and there was a $5,000 first prize for someone that could create lime paint, something that looks like lime paint but was more durable and could last outside in Bavaria. And that's the genesis and the birth of our company. The technology is much more readily available and accepted in Europe versus the United States, of course. But these products the primary differences are in the raw materials, the ingredients that come together. Everything in mineral silicate paint basically comes out of the ground, out of the earth. It's very little synthesis. That's not a good word. Processing. It's not like a big chemical plant that you might see at a Sherwin-Williams or a PPG plant. These materials come out of the ground, and they're basically processed very rudimentarily, if that's not even a word either, but very simply. And as a result, you have products that don't have plasticizers, they don't have biocides, there's no antimicrobial products. These products are completely natural. And you mentioned outgassing, which is one of the things for interior paint that most people don't understand or don't think much about past VOC. And, VOCs are only the tip of the iceberg. There's many other additives that go into acrylic latex paints that kind of evaporate out of that coating for weeks after it's actually dried. Whereas mineral paints, the only thing evaporating out of it is moisture vapor. And as soon as the water is dried, as soon as it's completely evaporated, there's nothing else except mineral left on your wall. So that's kind of the core difference. And the other thing that I always point out, I'm not sure everyone understands that a latex paint, even though it's water-based, comes from petroleum. It comes from a barrel of crude oil that gets processed into various plastics, liquid plastics like acrylics, things like Elmer's glue, is a pure acrylic. It's designed to hold things together, and it's flexible, and that's the same thing that paint does. So the binder in paint does, even if it's water-based paint, acrylic latex comes from petroleum. And of course, ours comes from a raw material that's the second most plentiful mineral on the face of the planet.
So I've always been one of those naysayers about natural materials because I'm looking out for my clients, of course, but we've been greenwashed all these years from manufacturers saying, well, our products are natural, therefore they are green, but I'd argue and say, well, asbestos is natural and, arsenic is natural. So just because it's natural doesn't make it safe. In your instance with your products, it is natural and it's safe. And that's a huge distinction.
Yes, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. One perspective I tend to look at is, to your point about greenwashing, and we've been the last probably 20 years, certainly the last 10 years, those issues have been hit very, very heavily, especially in the building materials trade. And what I find is that there's sometimes a trade-off between natural and performance. Many of these products, I guess you could argue that petroleum is natural, but many of these products perform well because of the ingredients that are in there. In terms of natural, sometimes you trade off. Acrylic resins are great. They do a terrific job in protecting a surface. Not so great when it comes to the additives and the things that are in there. But the difference, I think, is that mineral paints and stains are both natural, but they're also high performance. And I think that's one of the key differentiators that I look at. Our company has been dedicated to improving the planet and the lives of the inhabitants of the planets from our inception, from our founding. And today, I had an opportunity to sit with our CEO this past January. November. And I was sitting next to him, and he told me that the company has made a commitment to be zero carbon by, get this, 2035. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. They're going to an all-electric fleet. We currently already produce, all of our paint is made in factories or facilities that have renewable energy, 100%. We provide our own energy. But one of the cool things that if you think about a paint plant or a paint manufacturing process, it takes a lot of water. Water is about 45% of the content of our paint. Not a single drop of water ever comes into our plant and goes into the sewer. It is completely reutilized within the plant itself. So it's not only the raw materials, but it's also how they get processed that's important to consider. But at the end of the day, when you look at the lifespans of these mineral paints, it's arguably a far better technology. It's just not well known.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that your technology or your products specifically are probably most well known worldwide for exterior use. And of course you're doing interior projects as well. And I know our company at Green Design Center, we're really trying to promote it from an interior standpoint as well as an exterior standpoint, because there are so many other benefits besides just the fact that it's mineral based. But let's first start talking about exterior use of the product, because that's really where Keim has made its name worldwide with exterior masonry applications.
True. I think that's primarily because when you start thinking about the unique propositions of mineral paint, it's about longevity. It's about the fact that the colors don't fade. It's about weatherproofing and waterproofing. All of those are very important to exterior paint, performance. So I think that your point is a good one, in that many of the reference projects that you'll see on our website. You'll see the Sydney Opera House. You'll see, the Capitol building in DC. Those are some of the signature projects that we're known for. But if you take a look at the market segment in Europe, interior paint is a bigger portion of that than exterior paint. So it has always been interior paint has always been a core component of our product mix. It's just in the U.S. it hasn't been as widely accepted because of the fact that most paints are everyone wants to paint their house and forget about it. That's true of the exterior. On the inside, it's really more about color and style, and we have some great paint companies in the United States that do a fantastic job marketing color and style to American consumers. But our interior paints, I find, to have, while the unique proposition isn't quite as compelling, because who cares if my interior wall paint's going to last 30 years? I don't. I know I'm painting my walls before then. But the part that I always hang my hat on, I guess, in terms of trying to convince people that these are the right kinds of paints, it's not. It is the performance, and it is the safety and the health and the well-being components. But frankly, they're just beautiful paints. These are very different. Latex acrylic paints are smooth. They provide a plastic barrier on your wall. Light bounces off the surface. The surface of mineral paints is like velvet. It is a crystalline matrix. There's millions of pores in there. It's a crystal pore, if you will. Light hits it and it gets radiated in a way that's hard to, you can't see it in a photograph until you experience a room painted with mineral paint. It's hard for me to share that experience, but the color is deeper. The reflectance is much greater. You see the true color. Pigments are not muted by a whitish binder in an acrylic paint. Our binder is crystal clear. So they're just beautiful paints, and they are so reactive with light. I think that's what makes them, in my mind, if I were a decorator watching this show, I'd be going like, I need to check this out because they sound very intriguing, and they're just beautiful paints.
I have been in homes that have used mineral paints for interior application, and some of the walls are, an off-white color or a white color. Some of the walls were a deeper tone. And I can tell you, even the off-whites have as you said, this glow about them that you cannot get from a latex product. And I don't want to say glow from a standpoint of shininess. I'm talking about that the color itself just seems to have vibrancy to it. And you're right, it's hard to explain with words unless you see it in person, but it just seems like the color is deep, like you can dip your hand into it and become part of it. It's a very hard way to describe it, but for the deep colors, what I also find is the colors aren't affected by other colors in the room the way that latex paint colors are. Latex paint colors, because of the pigmentation system and the way light either reflects or bounces off of it, you can get a lot of metamerism to the colors. And metamerism essentially is the colors are changing in your mind because of the environment around it, the light source, light direction, other colors in the room, the direction you're looking at it, perspective. Mineral paint doesn't have that issue, at least not at the same level.
Agreed. I think that one of the things and I've been in the paint industry over 35 years, and the vast majority of that was working for the national brands that we're all very familiar with. But one of the things that makes this very different is if you look at a tint formula of a latex paint, you'll see that there's probably sometimes as many as 5 or 6 different colors added to that gallon of paint. When you look at ours, there's no more than 3. And part of that is because the purity of the color. We're working with pigments that are like cobalt blue, very expensive pigments, but it's stunningly beautiful. And it creates this true blue that you just can't get from a synthetic, pigment. We use red oxide, yellow oxide. Those are core that they come out of the earth. They're just beautiful. I liked the metaphor that you used about reaching in. I always talk about depth of color. It is a different appearance. So yes, the pigments are a huge component. Our pigments are all artist grade pigments, and none of them are synthesized. Everything is natural. And that's what makes them light safe. They don't, they're inert. They don't change color ever. Even bright blue, we can paint a bright blue stripe on a building and it's going to be that color for 20 years. It just does not change. It's amazing.
So that's a great point, because I know, and I've been in the paint business for a little less time than you, maybe about 30 years. But I know that I have to sort of talk clients down a little bit once in a while, because they'll go back to do a touch up on a wall they did maybe 2 years ago, and they'll open up that same gallon of paint that they used to do the wall, and the color's different. Because traditional latex paints, you get oxidation of the colors. You get that shifting because it's just exposed to the elements. Even inside of a home, it can be exposed to the air enough that it changes, it shifts the color ever so slightly. And again, with mineral paints, that doesn't happen.
Right. Once the water has evaporated out of the mineral paint, it turns to stone, literally. I hate to say that. And if the Germans heard me say that, they would be mortified. But it petrifies and it turns to stone. So once that occurs, after about 72 hours, there is absolutely no physical change to the paint. Now, you can wash it, but physically, it cannot change. It is inert. So it is not affected by ultraviolet. It's not affected by acid rain on exterior exposure, for example. Alkali, it's an alkaline material to start with. That's one of the reasons why we don't need biocides and antimicrobial additives, because it resists mold and mildew growth because it's high pH.
Yep.
So all of those add up to the fact that these paints just don't change with time. And again, it's not a huge selling point, I guess, for interior, but it's nice to know that your interior paint is going to be, it's just such an elegant finish. That's, for me, the easiest way to say it is, until you see it, you can't understand it, but it's elegant. It has that velvety texture, and they're just stunningly beautiful paints.
So a question came up already about the colors. And so what I'm going to do, Roy, is I'm going to share my screen. And so people can take a look at some of these colors. And then we can discuss it here.
Okay.
So you should be seeing on your screen right now just an example of one of the color decks that are available for the Keim products. And there are a couple of different decks available. And you can see, obviously, this is one of their shortened decks. This is another one, their natural stone shades. You can see very beautiful colors and nuance. From the similar colors, there's nuances between the differences. All right, and here's another one. So one of the questions that came up was the fan decks that you produce. How accurate are those to what you are actually going to get when the product arrives?
Great question. Fan decks in the United States are typically produced to a color standard or tolerance of 1 delta E, which is a delta E is a unit of measurement of color difference. It can refer to lightness, darkness. It can refer to hue, red, green, blue. It just depends on which axis you're looking at things. So as I said, most national branded paint companies and their color cards are controlled to within 1 delta E. The untrained human eye, typically, unless you're super sensitive to color, can't see the differences at 1 delta E. The further you get away from 0, of course, the greater the color difference. And when you were talking about metamerism, that red-green shift, that's a big problem with beiges and things that have both red and green in them. So we try to avoid any colors that combine both red and green in our color palette. You may have noticed from the color palette that it is, I would call it, I don't want to call it muted, but it is earthy. You're not going to see apple green. You're not going to see cherry red. You don't see a lot of purples in our color range because they don't exist in nature naturally. You have to take those minerals and fire them and do all kinds of other things to make them purple, as an example. So many of the colors, I've heard people describe them as they're very earthy. So earth tones are beautiful. You'll find a million earth tones in our product line. One of the things that I thought was missing from the European, that happened to be the European color collection that you had up on the screen, was there's not a lot of complex neutrals. And there's not a lot of real deep dark colors. We added those for the US palette. We have a current palette for the residential community called Rare Mineral Colors. And there you'll find a lot of deep dark blues, burgundies, reds, things like that. But you'll also see about 30% of the palette is what I would consider saturation wise a complex neutral. So they're midtones. You have to understand, Europeans like white. They love white. Everything's very bright over there because they don't have the high ceilings we have. They don't have big windows like we have. And frankly, they have terrible walls, especially in the obviously the older buildings. So they don't want to paint their walls black and dark gray and things like that. They like white. So you'll notice a lot of very light colors in the European palette. And of course, when you see the residential palette, the Rare Mineral Colors, you're going to see a lot more darks and complex neutrals.
Excellent. And that's really what people are looking for these days. There's been a big push in residential design for the bringing the outdoors in. Okay. And having those colors of outside to the feeling of being outside, whether it's, bigger windows, more natural light, fresh air, and then also the concept of biomimicry, of mimicking the outdoors inside of our home, just to give us that feeling. What I will do is also share the screen now with that other color system you were talking about. This is the let's see, the Rare Mineral Color collection. So you can see those light off whites, and then getting into some more of those saturated colors too. So this has been a very popular color system for sure.
Yes, it's a bit more expressive, I think, and it's more US. It's more us, And what we see is that we sell a lot of samples in the darker colors, but then we wind up selling the same off whites over and over and over. So I would encourage people to be bold. Color is paint. It's just paint. If you don't like the color after a few years, you paint over it. I saw there was a question about the 20 years, whether that was inside or outside. It would be both. Obviously, it makes more sense. Our paints have a 20-year color guarantee for exterior. They won't fade more than 2 delta E, which we talked about that a little earlier. So technically speaking, there's no color change for 20 years, even in cobalt blue. And you can't get that with blue acrylic paint. You just can't.
No. And I think the bigger issue is the breathability. And this is something we really haven't talked much about yet. And I want to delve into that. The fact that latex paints that we all know, and everybody who is listening knows that we sell a brand called AFM Safe Coat. It's the one of the healthiest paints made here in the US, but it is a latex product. And I still love the product for a lot of application. These two brands are different and have different types of applications, but they can be used in similar situations. One of the things about latex paints is that in certain situations, latex paints can actually start to lose their breathability over time. And we've seen this where you would apply a water-based latex to a surface, and it actually is considered not a vapor barrier, but over time, those molecules start to squish at a cellular level. They start to squish together and lose their ability to permeate vapor, which means then you could theoretically get a buildup of moisture behind the paint, ended up in a mold problem. Mineral paints being used either exterior or interior, they'll shed water. Water splashes up against it, it'll run down, but moisture vapor is allowed to freely transmit through the mineral paints, and that never changes.
That's an interesting point. I always point out too that one coat of latex paint might have some vapor permeability, not a whole lot, but some. But when you put 2 and 3 on there, you've lost any vapor permeability whatsoever. And there's a lot of studies out there that talk about buildings And where we see again, exterior is where vapor permeability is far more important because of the changes in the environment. Inside, our homes are relatively dry. They're relatively temperature-wise between 60 and 80. You don't see the huge fluctuations indoors. But here's something that I think we should all consider. Every building material is, other than wood and plastic, is vapor permeable by nature. So brick, mortar, stucco, concrete, stone, drywall, plaster, it's all breathable. Not breathable to the point that a mineral paint is breathable, but what you want to always think about is the last layer needs to be the most permeable, because moisture vapor, you'd never want to trap it anywhere in the building envelope, whether it's outside, inside, anywhere. And the thing is, here's what I like to point out too. I get calls quite often. It's like, can I put your paint in my bathroom where there's high, where I have a lot of moisture? I recommend it for every ceiling in every bathroom, because water cannot develop. It cannot, that's the word I'm looking for. You don't get droplets of water forming on a surface. Sure. It gets dispersed across millions and millions of those crystalline pores. So it evaporates almost instantly. So you'll never see droplets of water developing on a ceiling. That's another reason why mold is not so much of a problem, because on acrylic latex, that's a plastic barrier. That water is going to sit there for days and days, literally. If it can hang on, it's going to hang on there. Condensation, that's the word I was looking for. Right. So that's one of the things that's really cool. One of the demos that we do when we're presenting to architects is we have a piece of paper painted with acrylic and painted with Keim, and we take a water bottle and we squirt a little bit of water on both of them. 20 minutes later, we hold up the latex, and the water droplet is still there, and we hold up the mineral and it's completely gone. It's completely dried out. Wow. So that vapor permeability also creates a safer and healthier environment indoors, because these materials are meant to breathe. And when you put a plastic barrier on it, it's unnatural.
So this brings up a number of questions. Number one is, one of the things you said is you can use your product over an existing latex paint, and it still then has that benefit that surface itself, the exposed surface, will dissipate the moisture and eliminate the condensation. Of course, in bathrooms, it all starts with the design of your airflow and your ventilation system. Of course, we always recommend a really good ventilation system in the bathroom to get rid of the steam, because steam also carries with it soap scum and dead skin cells, and this is what leads to mold or mildew growth on surfaces. But the Keim product is going to essentially eliminate that as being a problem, but we still want to push the use of really good ventilation systems, number one. Number two, I wanted to point out that, years ago, I used to work with a product called American Clay, which is a troweled on clay plaster for interior surfaces. One of the biggest benefits of the clay plaster was that it was good for helping to regulate humidity in a room, because clay plaster absorbs humidity and releases it slowly over time. So again, you never got those droplets. A matter of fact, I've got it in my house that I installed probably 20 years ago, and still to this day, on hot, humid summer days, I walk into that room and it kind of smells like clay, because I know you're getting this release of that from that surface. I imagine mineral paint shares a little bit of that attribute, right, of helping to regulate humidity.
Yes, they're much harder, so you're not going to get that clay smell down the road. They become much harder. But yes, they mitigate moisture and there's a diagram in our brochure that shows you how things that get in, latex doesn't let anything go in or out, so everything stays in the room. So indoor pollution is something that we don't talk about, but there's a lot of studies, EPA among many studies, that show that indoor air is far more toxic than our outdoor air today. There's just no place. Our houses today are, you mentioned vapor barrier earlier. It's a tight wrap. It's everything. It doesn't allow more air to go in and out. And so we got to do everything we can to try to exchange that air. So air exchange is important, certainly through ventilation, but it's also if you have paints that are actively allowing moisture to come in and out, it certainly helps. And they're naturally hygienic. So they're not going to grow the mold and mildew that you might get. Now, you mentioned painting a previously painted surface. One thing I do want to point out is you never change the vapor permeability of the latex that's already on the wall.
Right.
So if you're painting over an acrylic paint, you're going to get the beauty of our coating. You're going to protect that coating. That layer is vapor permeable, but there's really no other benefit from the back to the front. You will have moisture going in and out of the layer of mineral paint, but that plastic underneath it is always going to be the barrier.
That's a great point. I think that just because we can do something doesn't mean we always need to do it or should do it. In this situation, I do see, especially in bathrooms, even using your products over existing painted surfaces is a great idea. I would prefer, if it was up to me, that the project starts from scratch utilizing your primers and paints. And so let's kind of get into that a little bit. Brand new house under construction. A lot of times we'll recommend, specifically in bathrooms, that they use paperless drywall because you're limiting the food source for mold. But utilizing the Keim primers and paints, now all of a sudden it's not as necessary to use paperless drywall, right? Because now your primer and paint is fully breathable, so you're not going to get moisture locked up against that paper. So I guess, in your opinion, if you were to construct a wall, you're going to draw a detail of how the wall should be built, how would you do it to take advantage of all the attributes your products have?
I think it's very straightforward. Drywall is a great building material from the standpoint that it is vapor permeable. It's fire resistant. There's a lot of really good benefits to it. The paper can be problematic, and using the primer and using a top coat of the mineral paints is certainly a very suitable use of it. I like the primer because it does a very specific job. It's lower pigmentation. It's designed to really penetrate that drywall, and it will lock down the fibers of the paper. And one of the things that, if you understand the chemistry of these paints, that whole process of petrification that I mentioned earlier, think about it hardening. It's hardening that surface. It's a great consolidant it's a good dust control for interior brick, as an example. Everyone wants to live in these urban markets, in these lofts with these huge high ceilings and bare, masonry walls. Guess what masonry does every day of its life? It dusts. And you wind up with this, like around your baseboards, you'll notice this like 1 or 2 inches of just nasty dust that's very gritty. Mineral clear versions of our paints are used as dust control because they strengthen that surface. So the primer will actually strengthen the surface of the drywall, and then that 1 or 2 coats of paint, and you've got a super system. Plus, it's beautiful.
Right.
For lack of a better, I keep going back to the beauty of it. It's just pretty.
And it really is. And I would say most people listening probably haven't seen a house or even a room painted with mineral paint. When you do, it's impossible to ignore it.
Yes.
All of a sudden the paint becomes kind of a focal point because of how beautiful it really looks. Now, on that, how difficult is it to use mineral paint compared to latex? And I'll set it up this way. Painting contractors, as you know, and everybody knows, are creatures of habit. And to get them to change anything, getting them to change to low VOC and zero VOC and toxin free and so forth over the last 30 years has been like pulling teeth, because they're used to what they're used to. They don't want to get rid of their discounts that they have, and that profit margin that they can make with the products that they supply. And they also know, understandably, that one person can apply X amount of square footage per day. So they understand the process. They understand how they can bid projects. When you throw into the mix now a product that they're not used to, it's like kicking an anthill, and they just get upset. I was involved in a project many years ago where the painting contractors were made to use another brand of mineral silicate paint, and they made it look lousy because they didn't care. They didn't want to do it. They were looking for reasons to speak bad about it, and so they did a poor job of application. And of course, the owner automatically blames the product instead of blaming the contractor who put it on. So realistically, the application of a latex paint versus a mineral paint, how different really is it, and how difficult is it for somebody to use your product?
There's absolutely no difference. These are water-based paints. You roll them on, you brush it, you cut them in with a brush around tight areas. You can airless spray it. Your point about habit, I think, is the biggest part. I used to joke when I worked at Sherwin-Williams, I was a district manager, and I would tell all my salespeople, I said, you have to remember that painters buy here and not necessarily here, because of that point. They find something that works for them, and then they stick to it because they don't want to risk. But homeowners, don't be afraid of this. It's different technology, but in terms of how it comes out of the can and how it performs, it's identical. These paints are a little thicker than what you're typically used to. You will notice the first thing you notice is when you pick up the gallon of paint, it's heavy. Yeah. It weighs almost 16 pounds, whereas regular paint weighs 11 pounds. So there's a lot more guts in the bucket, if you will. These are high solids materials. They hide beautifully. Now, there's a lot of talk about titanium dioxide and the health benefits or the health detriment of titanium dioxide in its aerosolized form and all of that. If you're brushing and rolling latex paints or our paint that has titanium in it, no problem. If you're spraying it and you're breathing it in, it's probably not a great idea. So you'd want to be using a air supplied respirator or an OSHA approved respirator. But in the end, these paints go on pretty much, they cover the same 300 square feet per gallon, which is about the same as a high quality acrylic paint. They look more beautiful, I think. Now, one limitation I will always go on record. We can't make a gloss paint, because minerals, as they're mined and come out of the earth and they're ground up and then mixed with water and things, they're flat, they're matte flat. So we only have a matte flat finish, which is part of its charm, I think, and part of its beauty. But there's no eggshell, there's no semi-gloss, no satins.
So along those lines, then, when people say, I'd like to use your product in a bathroom for moisture resistance, it doesn't matter that your products will be a matte finish because it still has that moisture resistance. In a kitchen where they would tendency to say, but maybe I wipe down the walls more often. Now I'll admit that, or at least I'll point out that 99 out of 100 people who talk about or ask about the paint being washable never actually wash their walls. But they ask that question because it's become a focal point in marketing of traditional latex paint that the paint is washable. So people ask, well, is your paint washable? Yeah. So you use it in a kitchen. Tomato sauce gets splashed onto the wall. How do you maintain that?
You wash it off as quickly as you can. If you don't want to leave it on overnight or something like that, because of the microporous nature of the surface, grease will penetrate it just like water does. So you want to wash it off as quickly as you can. Warm water and soap. I don't recommend using spray cleaners or anything like that because they have ammonia. They have all kinds of nasty other things in them. You don't want to use anything abrasive. So don't use a sponge. The best thing is like a t-shirt. Don't use terry cloth. That's incredibly abrasive. I never realized that. These tests are class 1 rated for wet scrub resistance, which is the best in class. You can't get any better than that. But what's different about a mineral paint versus an acrylic is think of it as saran wrap on your walls. You throw ketchup on the wall, it just stays there. It doesn't go into it, so it's easy to wipe off. With ours, what I want you to do is saturate the area with the soapy water, blot it. Don't do this. If you do that, you're going to polish it, and then what you wind up with is a bright spot. Yeah. Minerals, when you tend to abrade them and rub them, get shiny. And so it's like almost like a Venetian plaster in that regard. If you use anything like steel or anything like that on it, you're going to mark it up, but you're also going to polish it. So the best way is to saturate it with warm soap and water, let it sit, then blot it off, and everything it'll be fine. One other thing I will point out, due to the matte flat nature of these paints, they touch up beautifully too. So if you do have a ding, somebody slams their chair into the wall and now you have a gouge and you have to fill it and you want to touch it up, you don't have to paint that whole wall. You can touch up that area very well. Again, when you're doing your touch up, use as little paint as you can get away with. Dampen the area around it so that you're feathering into the new paint is feathering into old paint that's damp. Otherwise, you're going to get a ridge all the way around it. And then you may not see it looking at it this way, but when you look at it this way, you see that edge because it's thicker.
Sure. Okay.
That's true of any paint.
That is true. Yes. And so, do you have any recommendations then on an interior standpoint from somebody's painting their home and they're using obviously your product in the walls? What do you recommend, or do you have any recommendations for how they should finish their wood trim?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. We get that all the time. Why don't you make a wood paint? Remember what I said about petrification? These paints are hard. Wood is soft. Wood moves. It gets bigger. It gets smaller. I just noticed the other day, because the heater is kicked on here in Charlotte for the first time since last winter, and we have a door in our bathroom that was really sticking during the summer because it had expanded. Now I can close it with no problem. So that expansion and contraction of wood proves really problematic for our paints. So don't use our paint on interior wood unless it's a beam in the ceiling or it's crown molding and no one's ever going to touch it. Yep. I did paint all my crown molding in my bedroom. I did my walls, my ceiling, my crown molding the same color. I wanted the molding to kind of disappear. Architecturally, I didn't want to see it. And so I did paint all that, and it's perfectly fine. Don't paint a door. Don't paint a kitchen cabinet. That's just not a good idea. I would encourage you to buy a zero VOC, although be careful.
Right.
Because it says zero VOC. EPA defines zero VOC very differently than I do.
Yeah.
When I say zero, I mean no.
Right.
EPA allows, I don't remember what it is now, depending on the type of coating, but there's a fair amount of VOC that's allowed that you can still call it zero VOC. But there are some good paints out there that are, look for the pure acrylics, look for those things that don't have vinyl chloride in them. That's something that I would try to avoid. Sure. PVA or PVCs at all costs, if I can. Polyvinyl chlorides. Someone asked about heavy metals earlier, and the answer is absolutely not. And that's a good lead into cradle to cradle if we want to talk a little bit
please.
Too. But yes, the minerals come out of the ground, but there's no lead, there's no heavy metals. We stopped using many years ago any pigments that had any heavy metal connotation. So like nickel, yellow, got rid of it because it's not good. But so the yellow oxide that we use, and then we use a titanium yellow, which is a totally different pigment completely. There's no heavy metals associated with the use of any of those minerals.
Oh, it's fantastic. And so just to kind of sum up what you said before about the woodworking, and this is where, using a combination of using the right tool for the situation. So using the Keim on the wall, using the, like the safe coat finishes for the woodwork, because it's designed for that. Mm-hmm. What you're mentioning about zero VOC not really being zero VOC, not only is that true, but it's also true that zero VOC really has nothing to do with human health, has to do with outdoor air pollution. And so you had mentioned before that indoor air quality is far worse than outdoor air quality, and that is 100% true. When manufacturers take out the VOCs of their paints to meet the EPA regulations for outdoor air pollution, they also add in what are called unregulated VOCs, or unregulated chemicals. Most often it's ammonia, acetone, or butyl acetate that get added into zero VOC paints that act as solvents, but they don't have to be disclosed because technically they do not contribute to low-level smog, which is why VOCs are regulated. So this is kind of a talking point that I have on just about every show I do, that don't look at the VOC content of the product to give you any indication whether it's safe for you. Because, the fact of the matter is, acetone is considered zero VOC by the EPA, yet acetone is what's used for nail polish remover. And we know how
I don't like the
dangerous
smell
that
of
is.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, good point. Use the right tool for the situation. So, you mentioned cradle to cradle certification. Now, I actually know Bill McDonough, who started this program years ago, and I trust what he and his team have put together here. So, how is your product, or how did it become cradle to cradle certified?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to consider. What you said about zero VOC, and that's the tip of the iceberg. Don't trust that as your only indicator. Most of the holistic, what I would call holistic, healthy or clean air or green certification programs look at things far beyond emissions. Because so Green Guard Gold, let's talk about Green Guard Gold real quick. Very popular in the United States, but if you really dig into what Green Guard Gold is telling you, it's telling you basically that this is a low emissions product. That's it. It doesn't talk about heavy metal, not that anybody has heavy metal in their paint anymore these days, but it really doesn't look at all of the different components. One of the things that is remarkable to me about Cradle to Cradle is that it looks at things, not just the paint and what's in it. It looks at how it was built, how it was made. What does your factory look like? How far do your raw materials travel? Are you buying raw materials from companies that are socially that have social fairness regulations in place? Material health. What does it mean to the inhabitants of this planet? Water and soil. How healthy is it really for the ecosystem? So clean air is a very small part of what they look at. They look at the 5 categories, which is material health, water and soil stewardship, clean air and climate protection, product circularity. That's an interesting one, and I'll come back to that. And then social fairness. We presented to a group of designers back in May, and one of the questions came up, well, how do you know that your products are socially fair? In terms of, like, if you're mining these materials in Italy, many of our raw materials come from Italy, because they can't come from too far. We can't export from China or Iran or Afghanistan, where a lot of these minerals are found, because that changes the complexity of whether you're green or not. So we try to source everything within 500 kilometers of our production facilities in Germany. But every raw material supplier, and I'm going through this now here in the United States, we're changing our packaging to become more circular. We're going with more recycled containers. We're going with containers that are 100% recyclable. We're even going with 100% recycled cardboard on our cartons. So I'm having to go through with each supplier, and they have to sign an affidavit that says that they're doing all of these things. They meet all the clean air requirements. They meet all of the water restrictions within their, whatever jurisdiction they're in. But one of the things is, you have to certify that you don't use slave labor, child labor, that you're paying a minimum of a good wage, a living wage, they call it. So what I love about Cradle to Cradle is this isn't just about the product that you're painting on the wall. It's really about everything that came before it. And then that whole circularity thing, we used to call it, interestingly enough, years and years ago, Keim called it cradle to grave, because it comes out of the earth and it goes right back into the earth with no processing. You can take dried mineral paint and put it in a landfill. There's nothing that needs to be done to it. So the whole cradle to grave thing kind of defeats the purpose of circularity, because what you're looking for with circularity is just like in this plastic can that we're evaluating right now. This plastic can has lived before as many other things, and it now serves what I think is a higher purpose in the form of this 100 or 98% recycled material plastic can. It can go right back into use again. Just wash it out, reuse it. So there's a lot of this. The whole cradle to cradle thing is, and I know I think I mentioned to you that I attended their circularity summit not too long ago, and a couple of the hot points, the takeaways that I had came from it. Number one was corporately, this culture exists in corporations from the top down. This is not something that the the risk people are doing. This is something that starts in the C-suite and goes all the way down to the guys on the production line. And you have to plan for this. You can't just, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes decades of commitment. The other thing that my other second biggest takeaway was that there's a big gap between consumer awareness and their actions. It's like, I think most of us are aware of the problems with the planet that we live on, but how much of us are changing the way we live as a result of that? Now, there's a lot of people out there that do, and it's funny because I come home every time I go to one of these summits. I tell my wife, we're never buying Windex again. We're not buying detergent for our dishwashers ever again. In plastic. And so she anyway. Every time I go there, she kind of comes back and anyway, I always have great ideas.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so for those who know me and know my company, I tend to gravitate towards manufacturers, suppliers who, I guess the best way to say it is they're just good corporate citizens. Many years ago, I was taught the lesson of never doing business with people that you couldn't be friends with, that you don't respect their approaches, their morals and ethics and so forth. And that's why I've chosen all the companies that I've chosen so far. And this is exactly why I'm so excited to be working with Keim, because everything you're doing at a corporate level, you're not looking at it, how is it going to affect your bottom line directly? You're looking at it, how is it going to look to the client? And if the client has a better feeling about how you are approaching business and how you're approaching manufacturing, then that will lead to improved sales, improved usage. So I really applaud you for that approach. I wish more manufacturers would take it this way instead of just looking at the numbers, but look at how will they be perceived in the industry. So I appreciate you doing that. A question came up. Can you state the differences between mineral paint and milk paint? And this is a good one because I know over the years we've seen milk paints, we've seen like hybrid mineral paints in the market, clay-based paints in the market. Again, all hybrids. So give us a real quick differential between those.
It kind of goes back to, if you think about what paint is, let's start with just a quick chemistry lesson. There's a binder, a glue that holds everything together. There's the diluent, the solvent, water. Then there's additives, which are defoamers and things like that. And then there's the pigment. And the pigment is usually the heavy component. But if you look at a can of paint, if you were to break it out, you'd see all these different components. So milk versus mineral, back in in colonial times, everything was milk paint because there were no binders. There was linseed oil. There were a few other things that got used, but milk paint was kind of casein was another one of the things that got used quite a bit. The only thing I will tell you about, I think milk paint is beautiful. I love the matte flat finish of it. I like the irregularity that you get with it. I think it's great to paint furniture with. I don't think I'd want to paint my walls with it because if you tried to wash it, you'll see exactly why milk paint isn't real popular for durability. It's not washable. The mineral silicate binder that we use, it gets hard as a rock. So literally that's the big difference, is that you've got an organic material and you have an inorganic material. Inorganic is going to be harder, more durable, more washable.
Excellent. Great description. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So in the last few minutes, I just want to talk about exterior because we barely touched on that. And so question came up about painting exterior. Is it possible to paint one layer and then come back at a much later date to put a second coat on? Do you have an open time with yours, or does it really not matter?
No, it doesn't matter. It's a pretty common question. If you have a brick home and you want to paint it, the thing that very few people truly understand until they do the research is how much paint it takes to paint a brick home. Brick is a very porous material. Some brick is more porous than others. Obviously, a glazed brick isn't quite as porous, but you think about, and then there's texture. And every brick has 4 edges. You have to add all that into your square footage. So if you take a 10 by 10 wall, that's not 100 square feet. That's really 125 square feet. So a lot of times we will find customers and homeowners will buy enough paint to do the first coat, and then they will come back a year later and paint it again. There's no open window. There's no time that you have to recover it. The only thing I will tell you about one coat versus two coat, we have a 20-year warranty for our paints that requires two coats. The reason for the requirement isn't the durability of the first coat. It's about pinholing, and it's about having a continuous, finish that will keep water out. That's the key reason why you want to paint two coats. Even on really rough stucco and really rough masonry, it's important to get two coats on there, because you can't guarantee that a single coat covers everything without pinholes and voids and things like that.
And that makes a ton of sense, because I've used the product myself, and boy, one coat, even like really deep, dark colors, that the first coat you put on, it covers beautifully. You don't get, the push through of the color below at all. But you're right. If there are some high or low spots the first coat didn't get, the second coat will definitely take care of.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Excellent. So final question about exterior. A lot of the exterior usage nowadays is on like fiber cement siding. And what would be your application for a fiber cement siding, a hardy plank type siding material?
Sure. If you can get hardy without it being primed, that's ideal. It is the perfect substrate to paint. It's stable. It doesn't move a lot. It's got just enough concrete in it to make it hard. But it's like, for us, it's the perfect substrate, literally the perfect surface. I would argue that concrete's more perfect, but hey, not a lot of concrete.
You're not going to get that
out there.
right.
Again, the only drawback to painting with the mineral paints on hardy board or any of those others is that the sealants that get used to seal it all together, they need to be installed after the paint, because if you install it first and then paint over it, the paint's not going to bond to the sealant, because that's urethane or acrylic or God knows what else. The other thing is, if you do have primed or you have colored hardy board, you can paint that as well. Those paints that are on there are not very expensive acrylics. I can tell you, I used to work for the company that supplied them. So those are not meant for 20 years. Those are meant for, hey, it looks good for the first 5 years, and then you're going to be repainting it anyway. Even though it is a low maintenance material, the paints that are on there from the factory are not terrific in terms of UV resistance. So I would certainly, you'll see it on our website on the residential side. You'll see several projects that have been done with it. It's beautiful because there's no sheen. And I think that these fiber boards benefit from no sheen.
So you'll still get that same, if you do the two coat application, you'll still get that same 20-year color warranty.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's also a warranty against no peeling. I was going to say painting, which is peeling and fading together. So
yeah. Well, and the peeling would be caused by moisture building up on the backside and trying to push out, right? Mm-hmm. And because your product is breathable, that's not a problem.
Correct.
Fantastic. Couple minutes left, Roy. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about, or maybe some exciting projects you've worked on? Whatever you got a couple minutes left here. Anything you want to talk about?
The one thing that I did mention, or I did see, you asked about new uses of Keim paint. One of the things that we've embarked upon with the Parsons School Healthy Materials Lab is providing housing authorities, urban housing authorities, with mineral paints that are safe, create well-being, for their inhabitants, and doing that so that it's more, good paint shouldn't be available only to people that can afford to pay for it. So we're working with Kia Witherspoon through the Parsons School on providing housing authorities with economical mineral-based paints for public housing. So we're really excited about that collaboration. That's kicking off in 2024 with about 1,500 units in Washington, D.C. as kind of the inauguration. So we're very excited about that. We're pretty excited about we'll be launching a new website in 2024. Our website is it's a little tired. It's been around for about 8 years. And, you know, it's funny how things change in 8 years. 8 years ago, if you had asked me about green and eco-friendliness, and I would have said that was the eighth thing down on the list. It's all about durability. It's about this, it's this. Well, now that's risen to, you know, number one. One of the other takeaways from the Circular Shift forum that I went to was I was amazed that, you know, global warming is the number one concern of consumers in Africa. Would you have thought that? I would not have thought that. Yeah, Scandinavia, I get it. Europe, I get it. America, yeah. South America and Africa, they actually had higher numbers than the US did in terms of concern about global warming and the effect of, you know, our environment being affected by the things that we're doing. So I think that anything we can do to advance that, the knowledge, I think these podcasts and things like this are great discussions to have. Anything we can do to further educate people about healthy and safe choices for our planet and for each other, it's a great opportunity. So thanks again. Just a great opportunity for us to share a little bit about our company and who we are. So I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Roy. And I'm sure everybody who listens to this will get something out of it. It really, really informative. Appreciate it. You know, I was going to mention I've actually spoken at the Lead and Healthy Homes conferences around the country many times over the years. And so I'll be happy to pass along your information to that crew as well, because you're exactly right. I mean, I've worked on housing projects. I've worked in Habitat for Humanity homes, and it's unfortunate that the people who can't afford it are the ones who are getting all of this low cost and free materials, but they happen to be, in most situations, probably the least healthy of the products that they can use. And these are folks who don't have access to good quality health care or health insurance. So we really need to find solutions for them. And I applaud you for taking that approach. So thank you so much. Folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or direct message through the app. We'd love to talk to you about this. We have the products for sale on the Green Design Center website, and we look forward to servicing you and your projects in the future. Again, Roy, thanks again for your time. And everybody, we'll talk again next week. Take care.
Thank you, Andy. Bye-bye.